Hello everyone and welcome. Today we're taking a fascinating journey into the largely uncharted territory of forgotten sitcoms from the 1950s and 1960s. It's important to remember that television in the 1950s was still relatively new. Sitcoms were evolving and audience tastes were different. What might be considered slow or stereotypical today might have been perfectly acceptable or even groundbreaking at the time. These shows, often unseen for decades and in some cases possibly lost entirely, represent a unique window into the cultural landscape of the era. Join me as we explore the stories behind these largely forgotten pieces of television history. In the other videos of this series of forgotten British sitcoms, I started at 1970. There were a couple of reasons. One is that 1970 is probably as far back as many people watching my videos could reasonably expect to remember anything on television in much detail. The other is that almost none of the TV sitcoms that originated before 1970 have made a lasting impression. You could literally name about a dozen. Hancock's Half Hour, The Larkins, Bootsy and Snudge, The Rag Trade, Steptoe and Son, Hancock, The Likely Lads, Nearest and Dearest, Please Sir, On the Buses, Doctor in the House, The Liverbirds. These sitcoms are mostly only memorable because they either continued running beyond 1970 or had revival series that brought them back to the public's attention. There is another important reason. Most or all of the episodes were recorded on videotape and were kept in the broadcaster's archives. It is more luck than judgment that these series still exist. Of the 213 sitcom series that began before 1970, many were not recorded at all and 169 are not in any archive, or only one or two episodes still exist. That means that only 16% of the series were recorded and kept, and that's just counting sitcoms, not plays, interview programmes, sports and so on. Initially, television broadcasts were live with no means of recording them. In the 1950s, videotape recording technology emerged. However, the cost of machines was equivalent to approximately £300,000, and 2-inch tape stock could cost up to £2,000 each at today's prices. These high costs incentivised broadcasters to reuse tapes, recording over existing programmes. As recording technology became more affordable, it was utilised for practical purposes such as rebroadcasting a programme at a later date or capturing recordings away from the studio. The concept of preserving recordings for long-term reuse or historical significance evolved gradually and inconsistently within the BBC. In some instances, recordings were lost, misplaced or stolen. The opportunity of overseas sales necessitated the need for recordings, but these were not always retained in a library or archive. In recent years, forgotten copies stored by overseas broadcasters have been discovered and used to restore archives. It was not until 1981 that the BBC Charter included a requirement to maintain archives. Today, the BBC has one of the largest multimedia archives globally, dating back to the 1920s, comprising of over 15 million items, including television and radio programmes, commercial music, documents, photographs, sheet music and artefacts. Many of the ITV company's productions made after 1993 are now archived by the ITV Archive in Leeds. Factual programmes from pre-1993 ITV companies such as Westwood, Television South West and ATV are in many different archives. However, due to a series of commercial mergers, ownership of the Television South archive is unclear. Some significant productions are no longer available in broadcast quality format, and those that do exist might never be broadcast again. When Channel 4 launched in 1982, you might have expected that lessons had been learned from previous experience. However, the situation proved to be more complex. It was envisaged that ITV companies would produce most of the Channel 4 content, since each ITV company had to contribute 12.5% of their revenue to Channel 4's running costs. Chief Executive Jeremy Isaacs commissioned content from these companies, but many of the shows did not succeed. Consequentially, Channel 4 turned to independent producers for much of its content, which was also less costly. The rights to ITV-made programmes remained with the regional ITV companies that made them, with Channel 4 only holding UK broadcast rights. Most of these shows are part of the ITV archive. So far, so good. However, programmes funded solely by the original production companies belong to the producers. Since many of those production companies have dissolved or merged, the ownership and rights status of their programming is often unknown. As a result, even with extensive research, identifying the current legal owners of many of these productions is challenging. Programmes that were funded solely by Channel 4 included a contract clause that shows would be lodged with the BFI archive after the transmission rights expired. However, a significant proportion of those are only on the original 1-inch video master tapes, many of which are 35 to 40 years old and increasingly fragile. There is only a limited amount of time left in which to save programming held on these obsolete analogue formats. Much of the archive is unaccounted for. Much of it is yet to be digitised. A fair chunk of it is in copyright limbo and some is simply lost. Almost all of it is unavailable, which is a great disappointment given the rich and extraordinary range of programming that Channel 4 made in its prime. As I've just mentioned, old videotapes become fragile, and if not transferred to a digital format, they will be lost. The situation is even worse for shows that only exist as telerecordings, where a film camera has recorded the image from a studio monitor. Film stock can degrade over time due to exposure to heat, moisture and acids. The film's condition is also affected by how it was manufactured and stored. The image can degrade simply due to the age of the film stock, and the film can simply disintegrate. The first forgotten show we're going to look at might be vaguely familiar, only due to it being the very first television sitcom anywhere in the world. Pinwright's Progress was first transmitted live on the BBC on the 29th of November 1946. There were 10 episodes broadcast fortnightly. In the early days of television, everything was new and experimental, so having 2 weeks to prepare and rehearse was a necessity. The star of the series was James Hayter, the owner of the smallest department store in the world. You may recognise him from his brief stint in Are You Being Served in 1978 as Mr. Percival Tebbs. He was also the voice of the original UK television advertisements in which he told viewers that Mr. Kipling makes exceedingly good cakes. Conflict and chaos are caused by his staff, including Ralph, played by Leonard Sharp, a deaf octogenarian messenger boy, and outrageous sales assistant Mrs. Sigsbee, radio comedian Doris Palmer, who could have been the inspiration for Mrs. Slocum in Are You Being Served? Because Pinwright's Progress was broadcast live and no recordings are believed to have been made, very little is known about each 30-minute episode. However, copies of the Radio Times for the period have brief synopses of the first 3 episodes. In episode 1 we discover Pinwright has a hated rival shop owner and his difficulties are increased by his staff's efforts to be helpful. In episode 2, Christmas is coming and so, not to be beaten by his rival, Mr. Pinwright prepares his Christmas bazaar. There is trouble from the sudden appearance of 3 Father Christmases, one of whom is a fugitive from the law. Then in the 3rd episode, Pinwright intends to lure post-Christmas shoppers by a handsome gift to the store's 50th customer, cigars or nylons. Then he opens a new snack bar, but his plans are thrown into confusion. It's not so different from the types of scenario that have occurred in nearly every sitcom since. The friends and neighbours of this next sitcom are 2 young married couples named George and Constance Bird and Arthur and Maisie Honeybee. They live next door to each other in 2-room flats in a converted late Victorian mansion. Writing in the Radio Times, the show's writers, Sid Collin and Talbot Rothwell, said, "There is nothing ordinary about the Birds and the Honeybees. In fact, we think they are the most extraordinary people we've ever met. For one thing, they're funnier than ordinary people. Or to be more exact, the things that happen to them are funnier than the things that happen to ordinary people." Quite a bold statement, but they were justified. The stars of the show were Avril Angers, Benny Lee, Janet Brown and Peter Butterworth, who had all been in the Terry Thomas sketch show How Do You View, also written by Colin and Rothwell, that ran for 4 years. Dear Dottie was also written by Colin and Rothwell and again starred Avril Angers. She plays the role of Dottie Binns, a girl who holds a menial post on the staff of a women's magazine called Lady Fair and, as the Radio Times says, as one might expect, gets involved in all kinds of trouble. Dottie dreams of being a journalist. The article quoted Avril as saying, "I want it to be as true to life as possible. The characters you will see are people one meets every morning on trains, in buses, shops and offices, just ordinary simple folk who, like me, don't like a lot of fuss." The show was mentioned in the House of Lords on the day after the first episode aired, during a debate on the television bill regarding advertising on television, as ITV was due to start broadcasting in 1955. A critic in The Telegraph wrote, "This first episode, most of which was concerned with who could drink a pint of beer in the shortest time, can best be described as humour with tears." Lord Balfour of Inchrai quoted the article. He suggested it would be hypocritical to ban advertising of alcohol while allowing alcohol to be seen in television programmes. Sadly, neither Friends and Neighbours nor Dear Dottie were particularly successful. Sid Collin went back to writing for radio until 1957 when he created the sitcom The Army Game for Granada Television. Meanwhile, Talbot Rothwell would go on to write screenplays for 23 of the Carry On films. Real-life husband and wife Joan and Leslie Randall appeared as versions of themselves in Joan and Leslie. The first episode was broadcast just a week after ITV started in October 1955. Leslie played a freelance journalist writing a column under the pen name of Dorothy Goodhart, whilst Joan was the stereotype lovable housewife typical for the period. Originally, the episodes were only 15 minutes every fortnight, which was common for most early sitcoms. The popularity of the show meant they increased to weekly 30-minute episodes in Series 2. They had up to 7 million viewers per episode of a potential audience of 9.9 million viewers, as there were only about 4.5 million homes with TV sets at the time. They were compared to George Burns and Gracie Allen in their eponymous TV show in America that started in 1950. The American sitcom I Love Lucy aired at the same time on ITV, which is better remembered, but as Bernard Levin wrote in the Manchester Guardian at the time, Joan and Leslie showed I Love Lucy a clean pair of heels. They were sufficiently well known to feature in a series of television advertisements for Fairy Snow, which ran for almost 10 years. In 1969 they made a series for Seven Network in Australia, also called Joan and Leslie, possibly reusing some of the original scripts. Leslie was writing a Lonely Hearts column, but Joan mentions in the first episode that she's an actress. The show never aired in the UK, possibly because it was a ratings failure in Australia. Love and Kisses was a sitcom about a former engine driver named Bill Brown who becomes a pub landlord. It starred Arthur Askey, a very well-known and popular comedian of the time, as Bill Brown. It was a spin-off from the film The Love Match that also starred Askey. The show aired on ITV in 1955 and consisted of 5 30-minute episodes. Askey's character had a number of regular customers, including a milkman and a character named Wally who had a stammer. This setup was a classic sitcom format with humour derived from everyday situations and the quirks of the characters. Askey and the same cast had appeared in a theatrical version of the show in the 1955 summer season at the Blackpool Grand Theatre. Askey was a huge star in Britain at the time, and his presence in Love and Kisses would have drawn a large audience. The cast included Arthur Askey's daughter, Anthea, who played his character's daughter. While many early British sitcoms were completely lost, all episodes of Love and Kisses are believed to have survived. This is a major triumph for television historians and fans of classic comedy. It might have been a shrewd move on behalf of ME Films and Mid-Ocean Films to cast an American star in their sitcom series for ITV in 1955 to enable them to sell the show to American television. Joan Shawley, who appeared as Asgard Agnete Anderson, was the star of The Adventures of Aggie. Her character was an international buyer and fashion expert working for a world-famous London fashion house. The show followed her adventures as she travelled the world for her job, often getting into trouble and encountering spies and criminals. This blend of sitcom and adventure was somewhat unusual for the time. As the demands of Aggie's job meant she didn't stay in one city too long, her globe-trotting meant there was no regular supporting cast, although there were many other actors making just one or two appearances, including Patrick McGoohan, Christopher Lee and Maggie Smith. But don't be fooled, the entire production was filmed at the new Elstree Danziger Studios in Elstree Village and Hepworth Studios in Walton-on-Thames. When The Adventures of Aggie was shown on syndication in America, it was retitled Aggie. Unusually for a production of this period, nearly all the episodes have survived and are in the ITV archive. East End West End was a vehicle for Sid James, who played a slightly dodgy antique and bric-a-brac dealer. The show was set in London's Jewish business community. Some viewers found the show to be stereotypical in its portrayal of working class people in the east of London. Sid was already a popular and well-known actor at the time, particularly for his role as the sidekick in Hancock's Half Hour. The show also featured Miriam Carlin and Alfie Bass. 6 30-minute episodes were broadcast. A further 13 planned episodes were cancelled after Associated Rediffusion realised that the reviews were not favourable. Time Out for Peggy was filmed by ABC Weekend Television at their facilities based in Didsbury, Manchester, where they utilised a converted former cinema called the Capitol as their studio centre. 2 series were made, comprising of 24 episodes. They were transmitted in the Midlands and Northern England, but were never broadcast in London. The show was created by American Bud Grossman, who was later executive producer for 21 episodes of Three's Company and a couple of episodes of Different Strokes. Grossman wrote most of the scripts for Time Out for Peggy while he was living in England. The sitcom was set in a dilapidated boarding house inherited by Peggy Spencer, played by Billy Whitelaw, who had no money to run it. Most of the episodes dealt with the various lodgers or with Peggy's attempts to earn money and make a go of the business. There were slapstick routines whenever Peggy had to repair the plumbing or other fixtures by herself, being unable to afford to have tradesmen to do it properly. The show also featured Diana King, Desmond Walter Ellis and an early role for Kenneth Williams. In 1952, former miner Harry Ellingsworth was touring with Laurel and Hardy performing a ventriloquist act. He changed his name to Harry Worth so it would fit on the theatre posters. Stan Laurel advised him to abandon the dummy and focus on his humorous remarks, which Stan believed had greater potential. Harry followed Stan's advice, but due to nervousness during his new performance, he appeared bumbling and hesitant, which the audience found entertaining. A few years later, his bumbling, eponymous character was given his own BBC TV sitcom series, The Trouble with Harry, that ran for 6 episodes in 1960. The show must have been popular as he came back later in 1960 in Here's Harry, with the same accident-prone character coming up against various forms of authority, resulting in fallout and failure. There was a small group of semi-regular characters, including the never-seen art Mrs. Amelia Prendergast and their housekeeper Mrs. Williams, later replaced by Mrs. Benson. Various well-known actors such as Jack Woolgar, Joe Gladwin and Derek Guyler played a range of supporting roles. In one episode, Harry turns up at the BBC and is mistaken for a singer. In a foreshadowing of the real occasion on the 8th of May 2006, when Guy Gomer, a member of the public, was mistaken for British technology expert Guy Cuny and was interviewed live on BBC News 24. Harry dutifully performs Are You Lonesome Tonight quite well. He then roams the corridors of the BBC, causing chaos wherever he goes, including interrupting the iconic newsreader John Snagg mid-broadcast. His face may not be familiar, but Snagg's voice is unmistakable as the voice of BBC Radio News during the Second World War. If Here's Harry is remembered, it's likely to be due to the opening credits of the show, featuring a trick performed by a shop window that made it look like he was lifting both legs off the ground at the same time. You couldn't go anywhere in the 1960s without seeing it being copied by school children in every high street. The series was so successful that Harry won BBC TV Personality for 1962 at the Variety Club of Great Britain Awards. The show was renamed Harryworth for a further 4 series from 1966 to 1970. Yes, you've heard the title before, but this That's My Boy from 1963 is quite different from the better-known show with Molly Sugden that aired in 1981. That's My Boy was a half-hour sitcom produced by ABC Weekend Television that was only broadcast in the Midlands and Northern England. The series starred diminutive variety star Jimmy Clitheroe, who was the perpetual schoolboy. Jimmy also starred in one of Britain's longest-running radio sitcoms, The Clitheroe Kid, drawing a peak audience of 10 million and spawning numerous catchphrases. Employing his 4'3" stature and mischievous persona to brilliant comedic effect, he played a 12-year-old schoolboy who constantly caused mischief and mayhem for his fictional TV family, co-starring Itmar veteran and future Please Sir star Derek Guyler. Unlike many of the other sitcoms we've discussed, That's My Boy has survived intact. The complete series was even released on DVD by Network in 2014. Jimmy Clitheroe's northern humour charmed and entertained a generation of British audiences until his untimely death in 1973, aged just 51. Meet the Wife started as a pilot episode titled The Bed, broadcast in Series 3 of the BBC Comedy Playhouse series on the 28th of December 1963. The series followed the various ups and downs of a middle-aged married couple, Freddie Blacklock and his tyrannical wife Thora, played by Freddie Frinton and Thora Hurd. Frinton played a plumber who enjoyed gambling and having a drink before going home. His wife Thora was known for her constant talking whilst often criticising her husband. Freddie played the role of straight man, tired from Thora's nagging. In private, the couple would speak to each other in their natural North Country accents. In social settings, Thora, aspiring to be socially adept, would introduce her husband by pronouncing his name Fred and stating that he was a master plumber with an emphasis on the master. She would interrupt an angry rant at Fred to answer the telephone with an effective hello. This was 23 years before Thora Hurd, as Edie Pegden in Last of the Summer Wine, would call for Wesley or answer the phone with an affected accent. Viewers related to the middle-aged married couple whose frequent bickering, usually over trivial matters, ended with a kiss and a hug at the end of each episode, making it one of the BBC's top-rated comedies of the mid-1960s. Additionally, viewers might see Frinton performing a drunk routine for which he was well known. Frinton's portrayal of intoxication was so convincing that in 1963 he made a short film called Same Procedure as Last Year for a West German television company, adapted from a British musical sketch called Dinner for One. Frinton plays an ageing butler who becomes increasingly inebriated as he consumes drinks intended for his mistress's long-deceased dinner guests. The film has been shown in Germany every Christmas ever since, making Frinton a cult figure in Germany. British TV has never aired it, but it was screened as part of the Scottish Comedy Film Festival's Slapstick Weekend in 2018. Of the 39 episodes of Meet the Wife made, only 17 have survived in the archive. Sadly, Freddie Frinton died in 1968 at the age of 53. The Big Noise was a Friday night BBC series written by Frank Muir and Dennis Norden and starred Bob Monkhouse as top disc jockey Bob Mason, with Norman Rossington as his manager. Bob hosted a weekly top pop show called The Big Beat, which the top pop artists were desperate to get on. But Bob has a secret. He's an adult in a world full of teenagers and constantly worried he will be found out, as he doesn't like the music that he's promoting. Because the show is about pop music, it blended elements of sitcom with variety show segments, incorporating musical numbers and guest appearances of names from the entertainment world. This format was quite innovative and blurred the lines between the different entertainment genres. The guest star in the first episode was the now disgraced DJ Jimmy Savile. Other guests included DJ David Jacobs and showbiz journalist Peter Noble. The show's meta premise, with Monkhouse playing a fictionalised version of himself, was quite innovative for the time and adds to its historical significance. Only 6 episodes appear to have been made and none have survived. While researching for this series of videos, I discovered that some sitcoms of the past only exist as a title and a broadcast time in a faded copy of a TV listings magazine, with no synopsis or feature about the show, not even the names of some of the performers, and of course no videotape in the archive. They are truly lost media. However, it's great that some have survived, allowing us to get a glimpse into British sitcoms of the 1950s and 60s. It's a testament to the importance of preserving television history that these programmes can be enjoyed by future generations. There you have it, a glimpse into the forgotten world of British sitcoms of the 1950s and 1960s. It's a sobering thought that much of our television heritage has vanished, wiped away and lost to time. These shows, though perhaps rough around the edges by today's standards, represent the birth of British sitcom as we know it. While it's unfortunate that we can no longer watch many of these shows, it's important to remember their place in television history and the contributions of the talented performers and crews. Hopefully, more lost gems will resurface one day, but until then, we can only try and piece together their stories and celebrate the legacy of those who created them. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share this video to help keep the memory of these lost treasures alive.